There was outrage from liberal Catholics and non-Catholics over the Vatican's decision to label the former pontiff venerable, which is a step on the road to sainthood. Rodden and Rossi believe that the history on Pius XII has been settled for at least a generation, and then make the case of why it should not be. They believe that the Vatican saw the evil in the Nazi state, and Pius XI and Pacelli felt any condemnation of the movement would rebound against the church. They did consider Pius XI and Pacelli, as then Secretary of State as he then was, issuing a papal bull against the Reich, but remembered when Pope Pius V, and this struck me, the church has a really long memory, did that in 1570 against Queen Elizabeth I's regime. A bull then only led to a terrible backlash in Tudor England, entailing a wave of persecution against English Catholics, the execution of hundreds of priests, and the loss of tens of thousands of formerly faithful Catholics who decided to remain loyal to England. Pacelli firmly believed that any sort of papal bull, excommunication of German Catholics, or other outright condemnation of Hitler would make the European situation worse for all. There was no indication at all that anti-Semitism played any part in his thinking about staying silent. Pacelli was only looking at historical precedent, and he was right in not attempting outright provocation. Hitler declared to his staff during the war that after the war, we'll have no more attempts by the church interfering in matters of state. After the war, there will be no more concordats. The time is coming when I'll settle my account with the Pope. Rodden and Rossi want us not to surrender to Lord Acton's tyranny of the present, and Lord Acton is the guy who said power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and impose our own moral conscience on what Pope Pius XII should or should not have done. They remind us that in the 1930s, the European powers counseled caution in the hope that Hitler would prove himself to be a moderate statesman. They state that it is right of us to think that condemning Hitler and National Socialism was the church's duty as a leader in faith and morality, but point out the other side of that argument is just as valid, that one can argue that saving lives by not provoking a monomaniacal dictator was more judicious than delivering a grand moral gesture. Rodden and Rossi insist that Pius XII was not an anti-Semite, and that attempts to dub him Hitler's Pope are almost as absurd as calling Hitler Pacelli's puppet. Lang offers a less charitable view of the Pope by examining particular actions which he, Pius XII, took when he did not have, or which he failed to take when he could and should have, to draw a moral decision about what occurred during World War II. Lang writes about two particular instances where the Pope refused to act. One instance he writes about is that Pope Pius refused to excommunicate or even threatened to excommunicate Nazi leaders inside and outside of Germany during their 12-year rule. He writes that the Pope could have taken the initiative to excommunicate Nazis on his own, and he did not need anybody to advise him or give him permission. All that was required was for Pius XII to open his mouth and speak. The Pope, according to Lang, viewed Nazism as a lesser evil than Bolshevism, which was happening in the Soviet Union, and writes that his decision not to excommunicate becomes more notable in light of Pius XII's awareness at the time of Nazi responsibility, not only for Jewish victims in the death camps, but for murder committed against Catholics, including priests, in a number now estimated to be in the thousands. The second instance that Lang writes of is the Pope's refusal to do anything during the roundup of the Roman Jews on October 16th, 1943. He says that the Vatican, which almost certainly knew that this was about to happen, and I'll address this later, did not even warn the Jews. After the Jews had been rounded up and loaded into trains bound for Auschwitz, Pius refused to utter a word in protest. Ernst von Weizsäcker, who was German ambassador to the Holy See at that time, wrote that the Pope has not allowed himself to be carried away, making any demonstrative statements against deportation of the Jews. he has done all he could not to prejudice relationships with